Manchester United have finally settled on their new manager, and trust me, this is a name nobody saw coming. Meanwhile, Florentino Perez has set his sights on one of Newcastle's prized assets. So which star is Real Madrid about to poach from St. James's Park? Plus, is Mikel Arteta really willing to put 4 Arsenal players up for sale in a massive summer clear-out? All this and much more in today's episode. Let's try to hit 200 likes on this video, and we'll be back tomorrow with more transfer madness. Hit that like button, and let's dive in. The FA Cup exit to Manchester City last Saturday was painful enough for Newcastle on its own, but the bigger story that evening wasn't happening on the pitch at all, it was happening in the stands. Because according to The Sun, Real Madrid had scouts in attendance specifically to watch Sandro Tonali, and the strong rumor now is that Florentino Perez is ready to enter a race where Manchester City and Arsenal have already been jostling for position. You can completely understand Newcastle's mindset here, because losing Alexander Isak to Liverpool last year for a record £130 million still stings in a very real way, and Newcastle's hierarchy have absolutely no intention of letting another marquee name walk out the door. There have even been stories surfacing in the press suggesting Tonali himself wants to stay, but it appears that framing is well wide of the mark because the situation is far more complicated. The Italian hasn't submitted a transfer request, and there's been no official approach from any club, so the situation remains completely open. And then Tonali's agent, Giuseppe Riso, decided to step into the conversation, which is where things got considerably more complicated. You might remember Riso was already active during the January window when Arsenal's interest in Tonali became public on deadline day, and his attempt to calm the situation down last week had precisely the opposite effect. The line he put out was that Tonali's real market value would become clear in March, which is a fairly transparent reference to Italy's World Cup qualifying playoffs. Because if Sandro helps the Azzurri reach the tournament, that valuation goes to a completely different level entirely. Now, on paper, Newcastle do hold a strong position. The contract runs until 2030, and that gives them real leverage. But there's a critical caveat to that picture. If Newcastle miss out on European football this season, those contract conversations with the midfielder become enormously uncomfortable, and the club knows it. It's also an open secret that while Premier League interest is one thing, the pull of the Bernabeu is something else entirely. Newcastle are not naive enough to dismiss that, because if a serious offer lands and Tonali signals he wants to go, the club won't drag this into a drawn-out summer saga the way the Isak situation unfolded. They'll let him leave, and the negotiation will simply be about the number. Transfermarkt currently values him at €75 million. It is widely understood that Newcastle wouldn't even begin a conversation below 100 million, and Real Madrid are fully aware of that gap. The Spanish club's approach will be to open deliberately below that threshold. It won't be a serious bid, but rather an aggressive signal to dictate the terms before real negotiations begin. And for Real Madrid specifically, Tonali fits their summer blueprint almost perfectly, because they see him as a rare combination of elite playmaker and high-intensity defensive presence in central midfield, which is precisely the profile they're targeting alongside a center-back this summer. Cast your mind back to Darwin Nunez, because his story has taken a wildly unexpected turn, and from what we're hearing right now, a surprise return to European football is very much on the table. The lad is 26 years old. He left Liverpool as a Premier League champion, headed to the Middle East with big ambitions, and the harsh truth is, his options have completely dried up. So let's rewind slightly, because the full picture is actually quite something. Last summer, Arne Slot made it pretty clear that Nunez didn't fit his plans the way Klopp once accommodated him, and the Uruguayan ended up at Al Hilal. On paper, it sounded straightforward enough. Score goals, enjoy the lifestyle, collect the wages. And early on, he did show some decent form, which made the whole thing seem reasonable. But then January arrived and everything collapsed around him. Al Hilal moved quickly to bring in Karim Benzema, who'd had a very public falling out with the Al Ittihad hierarchy. The moment the Frenchman walked through the door, Nunez's status in the squad dropped off a cliff. Because of the strict foreign player quota in the Saudi League, Darwin was simply removed from the registered squad entirely. And at 26, watching games from the stands isn't exactly where you want to be. Sources say Al Hilal are fully open to selling, and Nunez himself is apparently so desperate to get back to European football that he's willing to take a significant pay cut on those Saudi wages. And that's where Chelsea enter the conversation. According to insider Mark Bruss, the Blues have already held preliminary talks. And looking at what Todd Boehly's side are missing up front, the logic isn't hard to follow. They need a powerful, physical center forward who can bully defenders, especially considering how badly Liam Delap's numbers have dropped off recently. Now, Chelsea aren't rushing into anything blindly. The club is still weighing up the risks and keeping other options on the radar. Nunez is not their #1 priority at this point. But crucially, they're leading the race, largely because their main competition has gone quiet. Newcastle were heavily interested, but Eddie Howe has no desire to push this deal through unless the price drops to a level that makes it very comfortable for their budget. So the path to Stamford Bridge looks relatively clear, and the only question now is whether Chelsea are actually willing to take the gamble. Arsenal right now are on an absolute tear, and Mikel Arteta's side are truly pushing for a historic quadruple. But beneath the surface, there's a much less glamorous conversation happening behind the scenes, and it centers entirely on finances. Because UEFA and the Premier League's financial regulations don't care how many trophies you lift in May, and after the spending Arsenal have done over the past few years, the books need balancing in a serious way. All indications suggest this won't just be a clear-out of squad fillers, because Saka, Saliba, Gabriel, and Rice are completely untouchable. Everyone knows that. But beyond that core four, the club is going to have to make some incredibly difficult decisions this summer. So let me take you through the 4 names that keep coming up in these conversations, starting with Kai Havertz. The man is Arsenal's highest earner, brought in back in 2023, and Arteta absolutely loves what he brings to the table. The physicality, the pressing, the ability to win dirty balls in tight spaces. For a period this season, he actually looked more natural up front than Gyökeres, which is saying something. But then the injury record started to tell a very different story. The knee kept him out for months, then a muscle problem followed, and it is becoming increasingly clear that this injury history is now a real concern for the club. Given that nobody is moving Gyökeres on after 1 season, it may actually be Havertz's fitness record that forces Arsenal's hand here. Next up is Miles Lewis-Skelly, and this one is almost entirely a financial calculation. In an era of tight profit and sustainability rules, selling a homegrown academy product is pure profit on the balance sheet, and the club knows that. The kid had a brilliant moment last season, but right now he's largely warming the bench outside of cup competitions. He's got 2 experienced players blocking him at left back, and Arteta simply isn't opening the door for him in midfield either. Selling him is the most painless way to generate clean money, and the queue of clubs from both England and Europe will be long enough that Arsenal can command a massive fee. Gabriel Martinelli is 3rd on the list. And the reasoning here is pretty straightforward. If Arsenal are going to invest heavily in the left flank this summer, and the board is fully committed to that, then neither Martinelli nor Trossard has done enough to secure that position long-term. The Brazilian has stalled in his development. He runs with his head down, he shows up in cup football, but that next level simply hasn't arrived. At 24, this is the optimal window to sell. The market values him highly. There has already been significant Saudi interest floating around him, and moving him on now is the kind of sober business decision that makes complete sense when you look at the squad's direction of travel. And then we come to the name that will truly surprise people, Martin Odegaard. Not long ago, the idea of selling the captain felt completely unthinkable, but the truth is, his influence has been quietly fading for a couple of years now, and while he was recovering from injury last season, Arsenal actually evolved without him. This squad has become harder, more athletic, more set-piece oriented, and physically dominant, and there's a growing feeling that this new version of Arsenal has simply outgrown the kind of orchestrating role that Odegaard plays. He'd walk into any possession-based club in Europe and be the best player on the pitch. The only question is who can actually meet Arsenal's valuation, because outside the Premier League, that circle of buyers shrinks very quickly. Yet, looking at the bigger picture, it seems the wheels are already in motion. Liverpool are dealing with a ticking time bomb in their defensive setup right now, and it all revolves around Ibrahima Konate. Team Talk are reporting that the club's hierarchy are fighting hard to keep the Frenchman at Anfield, but his contract runs out this summer, which creates a scenario where they could lose one of their most important defenders without receiving a penny in return. Looking at how Liverpool have structured their defense under Arne Slot, Konate is absolutely central to that blueprint. His recovery speed is elite. His physical attributes are outstanding, and the composure he shows when he's partnering the senior center back gives the entire backline a different level of stability. Losing him wouldn't just be losing a player, it would be losing a tactical cornerstone that's incredibly difficult to replace. The whole logic behind Liverpool's latest move is to go all in on the financial side. From what's being reported, they've put their biggest wage offer to date on the table, trying to prove to the player that he's truly valued at this club. But they're walking a very fine line here, because they also can't afford to blow up the wage structure they've worked so hard to maintain, and striking that balance is a seriously tough task. Now internally, Liverpool are projecting confidence that Slot's vision and the upgraded contract numbers will be enough to close the deal. But if you look at the bigger picture, being a free agent at Konaté's level is an incredibly powerful position to be in. Real Madrid have already contacted his camp and reportedly put a deal in principle on the table, while Barcelona and Inter Milan have also jumped into the mix with their own offers. Since none of these clubs would need to pay a transfer fee, they can redirect all of that money into massive signing bonuses, which makes their packages extremely competitive. It actually makes a lot of sense when you consider the scale of risk Liverpool are running here. If Konaté ultimately decides to leave, they'll need to go out and buy a top-level replacement, and finding a center-back of that caliber at his age and experience level is going to cost an absolute fortune on today's market. So this is undoubtedly one of the most high-stakes contract negotiations Liverpool have faced in quite some time. Roberto De Zerbi is currently without a club, but from what we're hearing, his phone hasn't stopped ringing, and it's not hard to understand why. According to The Telegraph, the Italian has emerged as the primary target for two major clubs, who are both going through, let's say, deeply turbulent spells right now. Start with Tottenham, because the situation at Spurs is completely surreal when you lay it all out. They're sitting just 1 point above the relegation zone in the league, and yet they're preparing to face Atletico Madrid in the Champions League. New head coach Igor Tudor has lost all 3 of his matches in charge so far. He's hanging by the thinnest possible thread, and rumors suggest the board have given him essentially one game, the Atletico fixture, to show something before they act. If Spurs somehow avoid sliding into the championship, the people at the top see De Zerbi as the architect who can drag the club out of this very deep structural hole. Now De Zerbi himself is openly looking towards Old Trafford, and there's a real story developing there as well. Not that long ago, when Michael Carrick was picking up results in his caretaker role, whispers were circulating around the corridors that he might be handed a permanent contract for next season. However, even during that brief positive run, the underlying data suggested a hard landing was coming. That bubble finally burst in the most humiliating way possible, a defeat to 10-man Newcastle. How Carrick responds to that kind of gut punch will tell us a lot about him, but all signs point to the Ineos hierarchy already looking beyond that conversation. They hold De Zerbi's experience in English football in very high regard, and the Italian parted ways with Marseille back in February, so his stock is still at a premium. People haven't forgotten what he did at Brighton, guiding them to 6th place and into European football through total possession control, relentless pressing intensity, and a remarkable ability to develop players within his system. That's the philosophy both clubs are currently very excited about. But behind the attractive tactical picture, there's a much more complex question sitting underneath all of this. De Zerbi is a fiery, demanding character with a notoriously difficult temperament, and how that fire coexists with the cold, calculated corporate structure of Ineos is a massive unknown. The bigger question might actually be whether the players themselves are prepared to buy into something this intense and demanding, because we've seen more than once how quickly squads at this club have downed tools when the pressure mounts under previous managers. Whether they're willing to push themselves through De Zerbi's aggressive system is where the real intrigue lies. PSG are on the move again, and this time their target is Bernardo Silva. According to Football Insider, this particular situation is shaping up to be one of the hottest stories of the summer window. Reports in France suggest Paris want this done, and they're prepared to go head-to-head with both Juventus and Benfica to get their man, which tells you everything about how seriously they're taking this pursuit. Now, the situation at Manchester City is where things get really interesting. Bernardo's contract is running out, and there is absolutely no movement on an extension. No talks, no dialogue, just complete silence from both sides. For a club like City, who typically plan every detail years in advance, that silence is essentially confirmation of his departure. It is widely believed that Bernardo has quietly made his peace with leaving, that this is his final season in Sky Blue, and that he'll walk away as a free agent when the summer arrives. And bear in mind, this is a player Guardiola absolutely adores, a 31-year-old who is still the primary creative brain in Pep's system, a player whose quality has simply not declined with age. So this isn't a situation where the club wants him out, it's more that both parties have quietly reached the same conclusion and are heading in separate directions without any drama. Now, the moment a player of that profile becomes available on a free, the queue forms instantly, and PSG are right at the front of it. Bernardo covers multiple positions for them, whether that's on the right side of the attack or operating centrally through midfield. And Paris see this as a massive opportunity to add serious quality without a transfer fee attached to it. Juventus are very much in this conversation as well, and interestingly, former Juve midfielder Miralem Pjanic has publicly urged the club to move quickly and not let a player of Silva's caliber slip through, which adds a fascinating dimension to the Turin interest. And then there's Benfica, who would love nothing more than to bring their academy product back to Lisbon for a homecoming story that writes itself. So the question for Bernardo is really quite simple. Does he take the financial power of Paris, the tactical complexity of Turin, or does he choose the emotional pull of going back to where it all began?